I'm Bernard Fischer, Professor of Classics and Art History at the University of Virginia, and we're here at La Ferrata, a hotel near Hadrian's Villa, Tivoli, on November 7th, 2010, and my guest is Dr. Marina de Franceschini. How are you?
Fine.
Thank
when
you.
I'm in the villa, I'm fine.
When you're here, it's so beautiful. We've had wonderful weather this week.
Yes.
So when did you first come to Hadrian's Villa?
A long time ago, that was in 1980, because I studied the villa just on books, and then I came to see the real place. I studied the villa for my master's thesis when I was studying in Marina College, and then I decided to come here and to see how it was the real place, which was completely different from what I have studied on the books.
What was your reaction when you first visited this enormous archaeological park?
That was overwhelming, and that there were so many things that you couldn't find on books. So there was a lot of work to do, and was discovering a new world, really.
And when did you start doing research? Did your research begin immediately, or did you come back a few years later to begin your studies?
Well, I had to complete my master's thesis, so because they wanted to have it done in a better way. So I completed my master's thesis in 1981, and then I enrolled in the School of Specializzazione in Pisa, but then I quit the school because I didn't like it. And I decided to write a book on Hadrian's Villa, because I realized that the approach just on mosaics wasn't enough, and I wanted to do something more.
And you had been studying Roman mosaics generally, is that right? And you then came here to study the mosaics, first of all, as your concentration?
Yeah, that was the beginning, because I wanted to do a thesis on mosaics. So in Brima College they told me, why don't you do something on Hadrian's Villa? Then when I came here, I realized that this approach was too limited, because you cannot study just mosaics. You have to study the buildings, you have to study the date of the buildings, and everything is interconnected.
And you have to study the use of the rooms to see the relationship between the kind of mosaic and the decor to the function of the room.
Sure.
That's told us a lot about the function of the rooms, hasn't it?
Yeah, because I discovered the pavements, the mosaics, were not important, because most of the pavements in Hadrian's Villa were made of marble, and the type of a pavement to me was the key for understanding the use of the buildings, because the buildings where the emperor was were always paved with marble, precious marble, and instead beautiful mosaics like the ones of the Hospitalia were meant for secondary buildings, where people living like
so the black and white mosaics
exactly
were secondary, and we call those cut marble the opus sectile.
Yes, and the vermiculatum mosaics, like the mosaic of the doves that we have in museums, which have a very small tesserae. These are really precious, and those were just in the emperor's.
Yes. And what about opus spicatum, the sort of the herringbone pattern of bricks?
That is used for two reasons, mainly in courtyards, when you need to have something really water resistant, and also for the roofs. For example, in the casino's semicircular arcades, you have a roof which is related with opus spicatum.
One thing that I know a lot of scholars have wondered about is how were the buildings connected through the landscape? Obviously there were walkways, but were they dirt, were they gravel, or were they possibly black and white mosaics? Because we see some traces of black and white mosaics on these walkways here and there.
It's something that can be understood just with excavations.
How do you imagine it? Do you think it was normal to have paved walkways?
Not always. I think that the villa didn't look like today, which is a romantic landscape. Was more like a Renaissance garden, an Italian garden, what they called ars topiaria.
Yes, so very perfect.
Very perfect.
Everything refined and clean, of course, and all of the plant materials trimmed and very neat and organized.
And I think that the Getty Villa, which at the beginning in the 80s was considered something weird, just an American would do. Today, I've been there last year, gives you really an idea of how a villa was. It gives you the real feeling. It's not that kitchen.
If I may make a plug, I did a training video for the Getty docents in the early 1980s sponsored by a foundation in Los Angeles, which is available online. And it shows the Getty Villa for anyone who hasn't been able to go to Malibu to see it, which I recommend you do. But it can easily be seen through the videos that I posted. Yes, I agree with you. What is your latest research? You've gone off in a completely different direction.
Yes.
And different directions, really, not even one direction.
No, because there is so much to study in Hadrian's Villa. And several years ago, we wanted to make a new survey of the villa because it seems impossible, since the villa has been studied for so many centuries, that there is not a complete plan, a diachronic map, and there is so much work to do. So first I wanted to make a general survey. Then I decided to study the Accademia. And the Accademia is still in private property, it's now open to the public. And I'm very grateful to the Bulgarini family, who are the owners, who lived there since the 16th century or 17th century, 1611 more or less. And they are very kind, they give permission to scholars to go there. So I went there with a topographer, we made a brand new survey. We used the laser scanner, we used also geophysics, because we wanted to detect the bearing of all these subterranean corridors, which are a feature of Hadrian's Villa, which is not very much known. Instead, Hadrian's Villa had this immense network of subterranean passageways which were meant for slaves, so that you couldn't see the slaves.
And this is different from the Vie Carabili, Vie Pedonali.
Yes.
These are even smaller tunnels, cryptoportici, that kind of.
Yes, they're just meant for one person walking.
So they're not 4.5 meters wide like the Vie Carabili, which are also underground.
But everything was connected, because from the Via Carabile you had the smaller corridors.
The carriage roads.
Yeah, that was the carriage road, was 4 meters wide, and two carriages could go, one side by side or two ways. And instead there are smaller corridors that are leading to the...
And those really haven't been documented very much.
No, especially in the Accademia.
And you have found a new technique they're very successful in identifying them.
Yeah, because we use geo-resistivity method. Because the problem is that...
So resistivity.
Resistivity. Because if you use magnetometer, there are so many iron scraps that it doesn't work. And then you have a problem with tufarock, because some instruments don't read it. Instead, in the Accademia, we knew that we saw this stair going down to a corridor or to a tunnel, and so we were able to adjust the instrument to understand what was the outcome on the instrument of this tunnel.
Of a void.
Of the void. And then we followed it, because after a while it's completely filled with dirt. And we were able to detect not only the bearing of this tunnel, but also to understand that it was quite similar to what Piranesi drew. And so this was a proof that, in a way, what we were finding was true. Yes. And now I'm also working with these speleologists with Marco Placidi, and they're specialized in exploring subterranean tunnels and also aqueducts. And we started exploring these tunnels which are going towards the Accademia, and there is an access near the Canopus. And we know from Piranesi that there was all a subterranean corridor from Rogabruna to the Accademia, so we're planning to explore that.
Yes, there's so much to be done that way. I mean, one could really explore all of the parterres. They must all have these tunnels.
Sure.
And there's a vast amount still to be done. So I wish you a lot of success. I hope you can do the whole site. And of course, we still don't understand the flow of water. Fountains are so important, but where did the water come from? How is it running? How is it collected? That's just now been, people have just started to work on that.
That's one of the main problems, because we don't even know how was the connection with the aqueducts, where the water was coming from. And also, the aqueduct that there is in the Bulgarini property is taking water out of the villa. Its slope is not towards
down
the
to
villa.
to the Riscello, the
Yes.
Risicoli.
Yes,
Down,
it's going the opposite
It's
way.
going away from the
Yeah.
villa. Ah, interesting.
So that's another problem.
Well, the work on the tunnels is fantastic, and I hope you'll have time to expand your studies using resistivity and other techniques throughout the entire villa. All the parterres must be cut by these underground tunnels for the slaves. But you have even something brand new, a new approach and a new technique that you have used with a lot of success already. Last month you gave a paper at a conference on archaeoastronomy. Can you tell us about that work?
Yeah, this is a very nice discovery. I'm very excited about it because we're opening a new path on archaeoastronomy. When I started getting interested in archaeoastronomy, I discovered that...
May I interrupt you? Just ask, what is archaeoastronomy?
It's because usually you think that buildings can be oriented towards north or south or west. And instead, archaeoastronomy studies buildings that are oriented towards
astronomical features.
Astronomical events, which mainly are solstices and equinox.
Yes.
And this happens in Stonehenge, happens with the Egyptian pyramids, happens in South America,
and the
wherever. But if you take a book on archaeoastronomy, you never find something about Greece and Rome. No. So this is an incredible fault.
Yes.
And if you look at the buildings that have been studied in Rome, you have the Pantheon, you have Domus Aurea, and also the Orologium Augusti, and nothing else. And all started by chance, because I was in the Apollo's temple in the Academia, and I was taking some pictures. And at a certain point I saw that there was a sort of spot of light on one panel of the temple. So at first I thought, oh well, I have to wait now half an hour.
It was ruining your picture because we want the light to be balanced.
To be balanced.
I saw your photo, it was very strong.
I would have to stay there forever and wait. And then I realized that the panel was really centered by the sun.
Yes.
So I started asking myself questions. But I couldn't answer because I didn't have any knowledge.
It wasn't your field yet.
It wasn't my field, absolutely. So fortunately I knew this astronomer. And I went...
What is his name?
His name is Pietro Planezio, and he lives in this small town near where I live. So I went to talk to him with a plan of this building, and I said maybe this building was built in such a way that the sun would come in on its eastern side through a window. And the problem is that the Apollo's temple is divided in 20 panels, which doesn't fit with anything because it should be 24 or 12 according
hours
to
of the day, or months of the year, or something that
the signs of the zodiac,
yes,
and so on. So this man said that this doesn't work. And then finally he told me, just take a measurement of the angle between north and this room. And I said 27 degrees, which didn't mean anything to me.
Yes.
And then he said, oh great, your building is oriented with dawn of winter solstice and sunset of summer solstice. Because the Academia has a series of rooms which are aligned and along this same axis.
Yes.
And so that was a great discovery. So last year I met another astronomer, his name is Giuseppe Veneziano, and with a cold weather, really terrible. He went last year on the winter solstice to see that the sun was rising exactly in the point that we wanted and was going all the way through. And the same happened this summer at summer solstice. The sun was going down on the opposite side and you could see it through.
Yes.
And at that point I realized the whole esplanade of the Accademia is oriented this way, so it's a circular landscape. And at the northern end of it there is Roccabruna. At that point I started to ask other questions about
Roccabruna, this great tower topped by a circular Doric temple.
Yeah.
All fairly well preserved except for the poor temple, which has fallen into pieces, which we see along the base of the Roccabruna. And what did you find there?
And again, my discovery was by chance, because I tried to understand. I realized that the alignment was the same. And fortunately, I spoke about Roccabruna with Robert Mangurian and Marianne Ray. And he said, oh, you know, this is one of my best discoveries. I discovered that during the summer solstice, the sun is going down and is entering through the main door of the building, and also on top there is this sort of window that is made like in medieval castles.
Yes, a very strange window.
Very strange window, and it's
but the opposite of a medieval window. Because the medieval window is small on the facade and opens up toward the interior, whereas this one is big on the facade and narrows going inside. So it's the opposite of a window. It's strange for a window. It's obviously not a window.
But the thing is that he understood that it was meant for light.
Yes.
Because recently there were these weird theories that there were armillas hanging inside the dome, and they were suspended over big beams which couldn't fit inside, because outside it's really large and inside is this.
And it doesn't make sense to put an armilla inside anyway.
No, because it would be completely blinded.
Yeah, it would be just decorative at that point.
Yeah, but Hadrian didn't do anything but that didn't have a real reason.
Yes.
So that's why. And so he told me, you know, during summer solstice the sun goes through and there is a beam of light inside the dome. So last year I was there and I saw this fantastic
The beam enters through that window.
Enters and goes all the way up and then down, and at the beginning is very bright, at the end is red because the sun is going down. And then Robert told me that when he saw it, the sun was just switching off at a certain point. But now there are trees growing in front of the building, so you don't see that effect anymore.
Yes.
But it's fantastic because it's still working. It's like in our symbol.
So this is another kind of research that could be extended throughout the villa, which has, I mean, one of the questions that the analysis of the 20th century has thrown up is, well, how is this place organized? And architectural historians and critics have approached it from a purely formal point of view, and they've come up with ideas of, you know, varietas. The principle is variety, because every parterre, every esplanade is oriented differently, and none of them are oriented exactly to the cardinal points, east, west, north, south. So the only principle they could come up with is variety, which isn't really much of a principle. But now, thanks to your research, we have possibly an anchor for at least the orientation of the Accademia, which is set up in such a way as to take advantage of the rising and setting of the sun on these two solstices. So one would like to extend that kind of study throughout the villa and see what else might turn up.
I am working now with another expert of archaeoastronomy. His name is Mario Codebò, and he's an expert of this incredible calculation with this long formulas, and I trust him on his word because they are so difficult for me. And we plan to study the orientation of the other buildings, because it's not that easy. You have also to consider that there are hills around the villa, So maybe the sun is not rising at that time in that point, but the angle could be different.
And then the sun itself, the apparent course of the sun through the sky is on is not fixed. It's changing on a cycle of some thousands of years. So we have to also make these calculations as it would have been in Hadrian's lifetime,
exactly.
and not, of course, the way it is today. And this brings up modeling, computer modeling, which you mentioned in your paper that you just published last month, October 2010, how useful computer modeling can be, because another factor in these alignments is, of course, not just the way the buildings are built on the ground in plan and oriented toward the rising and setting of the sun, and possibly when we talk about the moon, and possibly the rising and setting of constellations in the sky during the year. But the elevation, Cape the Roccabruno, we have that window, that funny window. If Robert and Marianne hadn't seen that window and been there for the solstice, who would have ever thought that the Roccabruno had a solar orientation? So the elevation is important. And a lot of the elevations are gone, but we can restore them digitally most easily. We could restore them physically if we had a lot of money, but we don't. So you mentioned computer modeling, and of course, if we had a computer model of the whole site, we could simulate the events of an entire year or several years within a day or two.
Sure.
And we could make observations all over the virtual world of the rising and setting sun and the moon and so on. And make these observations the way the Mangurians were able to do at Roccabruno, the way you were able to do in the Academia.
No, because in the Academia, the Apollo's temple, just half of it is standing, and unfortunately the part that has collapsed is the most important one for the sun, because it is on the side where the sun is moving. So just with a 3D model we could see what happens, because it's not just a question of a solstice. You can think also about the Dies Imperii, the day when Hadrian became emperor, or other important days like the birthday of Rome. There are many dates that could be taken into consideration and to see what happens. And
very
so
interesting.
It's a completely
You're a font of wisdom and bubbling new ideas about Hadrian's Villa, which is wonderful. It's been wonderful to get to know you the last few days. Do you have even other ideas that you haven't had a chance to look into yet? What other ideas does your personal research program for Hadrian's Villa contain?
Well, I was also thinking about remote sensing like LiDAR or aerial pictures, because one of the problems in the villa is to understand where its borders were.
We don't know the limits.
We don't know, and also the roads that will lead.
It's not big enough yet. It needs to be bigger.
No, that's more than enough. But, for example, all these esplanades have never been explored. We don't know if they were gardens, if they were woods,
gardens. What about garden archaeology? We've had a little, but we could have a lot more.
A lot more, really.
Yes,
really,
that's
because it's a brand new field of study.
We know how to do it now. We know how to do it. And we're lucky in the gardens because the Romans, when they planted something, they kept it in the flower pot.
Sure.
So there's no doubt about a planting because you still have the flower pot, which is ceramics and it survives beautifully.
This has been found in the Canopus. It was an excavation made by Salza Ricotti and Jaselski. But, for example, in the Academia, it has never been done. I'm sorry. Inside the Academia, there is this large porch. Probably there was a water basin in its center, but we don't know. It has never been excavated. And the same goes for the garden. And so now we have, since very seldom were done stratigraphical excavations in the villa, in a place like the Academia, it's still possible to make a stratigraphical excavation. So that would be, it takes a lot of money. A
lot of time. Many generations to come can be working and will be working, we're sure, at Hadrian's Villa.
It's really a never-ending story.
So we hope people who are watching this will be inspired to visit and to help and do their own research. Well, thank you very much for talking to us. I know you're eager. It's almost time for the villa to open this morning. I mean, I'm sure your last morning here, you want to get back over there. So thank you for taking time to talk to us.
Thank you very much.